In a quiet town, far removed from the noise of the world, lived a man named Rafael. Rafael was not just any father. He was a man carved from discipline, bound by tradition, and marked by the silent grief of losing his beloved wife, Sophia. Her absence lingered in every corner of his home, a photograph on the wall, the scent of her favorite flowers, the empty chair at the dining table. Rafael's life revolved around one truth: his only son, Daniel. To Rafael, Daniel was not just a child, but the living heartbeat of everything he had left. He raised him with a firm hand, believing discipline was the armor that would protect his boy from the cruelty of the world. But discipline often comes with distance. And as Daniel grew, he found warmth and understanding not in his father's stern words, but in the gentle presence of his aunt, Lucia. Lucia was the opposite of Rafael, tender where he was rigid, forgiving where he was demanding. Daniel often sought comfort in her kindness, a comfort he could not always find at home. Time passed, and Daniel became a man of his own will. And as fate would have it, he fell deeply in love with Clara, a woman whose beauty was matched only by her strong spirit. To Daniel, she was his salvation, the light that pierced through the shadows of his strict upbringing. But Clara did not come alone. Behind her stood her parents, Richard and Evelyn. They were wealthy, proud, and accustomed to power. To them, Rafael was nothing more than a stubborn old man bound by outdated values. And from the very first meeting, an invisible war began, a clash of traditions, egos, and unspoken wounds. It was in this fragile balance and between love and duty, pride and forgiveness, that the storm began to rise. A storm that would test Rafael, Daniel, and Clara in ways none of them could have ever imagined. Daniel's love for Clara was not a sudden flame, but a slow, consuming fire that grew stronger with every stolen glance, every whispered promise, every moment when the world seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of them. For Daniel, Clara was not merely a woman he adored, she was salvation itself. Her presence calmed the storms that had raged within him since childhood. She was the gentleness he had long sought, the tenderness he had craved but had rarely known. And so, when he asked her to be his wife, it was not with hesitation, but with conviction, as if fate itself had brought them together. The wedding, though simple, was filled with a sacred weight that no grand ceremony could have matched. Friends and family gathered, their faces lit with joy, their voices echoing blessings. Daniel, standing at the altar, felt as though the world itself had stilled in reverence for this moment. When Clara walked towards him, clothed not only in beauty but in an aura of strength, his heart swore allegiance not only to her but to the life they would build together. As vows were spoken, Daniel's voice trembled with sincerity. "Clara, I will stand by you in every storm, in every shadow, in every silence. You are my light, and I will never let it fade." And Clara, her eyes glistening, replied, "Daniel, I give you not just my love but my soul. I will walk with you through joy and through sorrow, for with you I am whole." The words bound them, not merely in law but in spirit, and when their lips met to seal the union, it felt as if heaven itself bore witness. Yet even amidst the joy of that day, shadows lingered at the edges. Rafael, Daniel's father, stood quietly among the guests. He did not smile, nor did he weep, for his heart was caught in a battle only he understood. To him, this marriage was both a victory and a wound. He was glad to see his son find happiness, yet a storm of doubt churned within. Clara was from a world he did not trust, a family that carried pride like a sword and wore arrogance like a crown. Rafael feared not Clara herself, for her eyes held honesty, but the forces behind her, the parents who looked at him with disdain, as though he were beneath them. And indeed, Clara's parents, Richard and Evelyn, did not hide their contempt. They attended the wedding with polished faces, wearing smiles that were no more than masks. Richard's gaze, sharp and calculating, swept over the modest ceremony with thinly veiled disapproval. Evelyn's lips curled into smiles that never reached her eyes, her whispers dripping with judgment that only Clara could hear. When Richard raised his glass for a toast, his words carried a sting beneath their surface. "To my daughter Clara, whose grace and beauty shine far beyond these humble surroundings. And to her husband Daniel, may he rise to the challenge of giving her the life she deserves. A murmur passed through the guests. Daniel felt the insult pierce through the polite applause, but he swallowed his pride for Clara's sake. Rafael, however, heard every word like thunder. His jaw tightened, but he remained silent, for this was his son's day, not a day for war. Clara, caught between her parents' pride and her husband's wounded dignity, pressed Daniel's hand under the table. She whispered softly, "Ignore them. Their words cannot touch what we have." But though Daniel nodded, the wound was already planted. As days turned into weeks, Daniel and Clara began their married life together. Their home was modest but alive with love. Clara decorated the small space with care, filling it with warmth that money could never buy. Daniel, though still struggling in his career, worked tirelessly, determined to give his wife not riches but devotion. They laughed, they dreamed, they shared quiet nights under the stars, whispering of children, of journeys, of futures yet to come. But happiness has a way of drawing envy. Richard and Evelyn visited often, uninvited but unavoidable. They carried themselves like royalty stepping into a peasant's hut, their eyes scanning the house as if every corner confirmed their low opinion of Daniel. Their comments, though wrapped in polite tones, struck like hidden daggers. "Clara," Evelyn would sigh, her eyes gliding across the furniture, "how do you endure such simplicity after the home you were raised in?" Or Richard, leaning back in his chair, smirking, "Daniel, a husband must be more than affectionate. A man must provide wealth, influence, status. Love alone is a poor currency." Daniel at first bore these words in silence. For Clara's sake, he bit his tongue, forcing himself to endure the humiliation. But inside, his pride burned, and every insult echoed long after they were gone. Clara, desperate to keep peace, begged him not to take their words to heart. "They are my parents, Daniel," she whispered. "Their love for me is twisted by pride, but it is love nonetheless." But Daniel, wounded, would reply, "Their love for you is poison for us. Do you not see how they look at me? How they look at us? They want me to fail." And in the silence of those nights, the distance between husband and wife began to creep in, not out of lack of love, but out of the weight of others' shadows. Rafael watched from afar. He saw how Daniel's laughter grew scarce, how Clara's eyes dimmed under the weight of constant judgment, how their young marriage was being tested not by each other, but by the cruel pride of Richard and Evelyn. And though Rafael had once been a man of silence, his heart began to stir with the old fire. He had buried his wife Sophia with dignity, raised his son with iron discipline, and endured years of solitude. But now, as he watched his son's happiness wither under the arrogance of others, he felt the old warrior within him awaken. This marriage, beautiful yet fragile, had become more than a bond between two lovers. It was now a battlefield, a place where love would be tested against pride, loyalty against manipulation, and where the strength of family itself would be pushed to the very edge. And Rafael knew the time would soon come when silence would no longer be enough. For a time, Daniel and Clara lived in a fragile peace. Their small home echoed with laughter, the soft rhythm of domestic life, the dreams of two souls building a future together. Clara planted flowers in the garden. Daniel worked late into the evening, and when the sun set, they would sit together on the porch speaking of children they had not yet conceived and journeys they had not yet taken. But happiness, like glass, is delicate, and in their case it was destined to be cracked by hands that could not bear to see simplicity thrive where pride demanded grandeur. The first fractures appeared with Richard and Evelyn's visits. They came not as guests but as conquerors inspecting conquered land. Their footsteps carried arrogance, their voices polished with courtesy, but sharpened with disdain. Every glance around Daniel and Clara's modest home was a silent verdict. This is not enough for our daughter. Richard was the sharper blade. He wore his superiority openly, his every word a carefully chosen insult. Daniel, he would remark over dinner, his tone dripping with patronage, a man must provide more than affection. A man must raise his wife's status, elevate her to the life she deserves. Do you think love alone can clothe her, feed her, secure her future? Daniel would stiffen, his fists curling beneath the table. He wanted to answer with fury, to remind Richard that dignity is not measured in gold, but Clara's pleading eyes would stop him. For her sake, he swallowed his rage and forced silence into his throat. Evelyn, meanwhile, struck with subtler weapons. She wrapped her barbs in honeyed tones, disguising cruelty as concern. "My sweet Clara," she would say, caressing her daughter's cheek, "you were born into refinement. Your hands were not meant for toil, your eyes not meant for sorrow. Why choose a life where struggle is constant when you could have had comfort at your fingertips?" Her words stung Clara like ice. She loved her husband fiercely, yet her mother's voice awakened quiet doubts in her heart. She would lie awake at night, staring into the darkness, wondering if perhaps she had indeed chosen hardship. And when Daniel, restless and brooding, asked what troubled her, she would shake her head and whisper, "Nothing, my love. Nothing." But silence speaks louder than words. Rafael, though often an observer, missed nothing. His eyes, sharpened by years of solitude and grief, saw the cracks widening. He saw the way Daniel's shoulders slumped with unspoken humiliation, the way Clara's smile dimmed, the way their love, once vibrant, now fought to survive beneath the weight of invisible chains. Rafael's instinct was to act, to shield his son as he had always tried. But discipline had been the creed of his life, and discipline demanded patience. He told himself that silence was wisdom, that love would prevail without his interference. And so for a time he endured, watching, waiting, aching. But poison, once sown, spreads quickly. One evening the conflict reached a breaking point. Richard and Evelyn arrived unannounced, sweeping into Daniel's home with the arrogance of royalty. Clara tried to mask her unease with forced smiles, but Daniel's jaw was already tight. Dinner was laid, yet it was not food that filled the air. It was tension, heavy and suffocating. Richard struck first. He leaned back in his chair, his voice booming. "This house," he declared, "is a cage. My daughter deserves walls adorned with beauty, not this modest prison. Daniel, you have trapped her in mediocrity. A man of true worth would give her a life worthy of her name." Daniel's hand slammed the table, rattling the plates. His voice, long restrained, broke free like thunder. "Enough. You speak of worth as if it is measured in gold. I give Clara my love, my labor, my life itself, and you dare call it nothing?" Clara rose, tears burning her eyes. "Please, Daniel, stop," she whispered, torn between her husband and her father. Evelyn clutched her daughter's arm, whispering venom in her ear. "Leave with us. You do not belong in this cage. Come home." And it was then that Rafael entered the room. He had been silent for too long, bearing witness to the slow unraveling of his son's peace. But now, his patience broke. His presence filled the room like a shadow of judgment. His eyes, dark with fury, fell upon Richard, then Evelyn, and finally upon his son. When he spoke, his voice was deep, unyielding, carved from the stone of his grief and his pride. "This home," Rafael said, each word like a hammer striking iron, "may not boast of riches. Its walls may not shine with marble, nor its halls with gold, but it is built on sacrifice. It is built on the blood of a father who buried his wife and lived only to raise his son. It is built on love stronger than any empire you could imagine." His gaze fixed on Richard. "You speak of worth, Richard, as though wealth defines a man. But let me tell you, a man's worth is not in the weight of his pocket, but in the strength of his soul. And if you cannot see the dignity of my son, then you shall not stand beneath his roof again." Silence devoured the room. Evelyn's face hardened. Richard's pride burned like fire, but they said nothing. Clara wept quietly, her heart torn between worlds, while Daniel stood frozen, the weight of his father's words sinking into his very bones. Richard rose slowly, his eyes narrowing, his pride wounded beyond repair. "You will regret this," he spat, his voice trembling with rage. Evelyn pulled Clara close as though reclaiming what she believed was hers, and with a final glare, They left, their footsteps echoing like war drums. The door closed. Silence remained. Daniel turned to his father, torn between gratitude and shame. "Why now?" he whispered. "Why speak only now?" Rafael placed a heavy hand on his son's shoulder. "Because, my son, some battles are not won by silence. Some storms must be faced with fire. And this war is far from over." And so, though Richard and Evelyn left that night, Rafael knew they would return. He knew their pride would not allow them to retreat. He knew Clara's heart would remain divided, her loyalties torn. The family stood on the edge of a precipice, the ground beneath them already trembling. For though words had been spoken and lines had been drawn, the true conflict and the one that would decide the fate of their love, their loyalty, and their very future had only just begun. The night Richard and Evelyn stormed out of Daniel's home left the air thick with silence. Yet silence does not mean peace. The walls of that house now carried echoes of anger, hurt, and words that could not be taken back. Daniel sat by the window, his hands trembling as though still gripping the rage he had tried to bury. Clara wept in their bedroom, torn between the man she loved and the parents who had shaped her very soul. And Rafael, standing in the shadows, knew a line had been crossed. But when lines are crossed, there is no return. For days after the confrontation, Clara's parents waged war not with swords but with whispers. Richard's voice traveled through the city like smoke, spreading poison in hushed tones. "Daniel is unworthy, a man of no stature, no wealth, no future. My daughter has been wasted on him." Evelyn added fuel, weaving webs of rumor in every gathering she attended. Poor Clara, trapped in a life of hardship. She deserves better, but love makes fools of even the brightest souls. Soon the whispers grew into storms. Friends who once congratulated Clara now offered pity. Acquaintances looked at Daniel with veiled smirks, repeating Richard's judgments behind closed doors. Even Daniel's colleagues began to view him not as a man of ambition, but as a husband who had shackled himself to expectations he could never meet. The world was watching, and the marriage, once shielded by love, was now exposed to fire. Daniel felt the weight most heavily. Each day he returned home from work with shoulders hunched, his pride gnawed by the judgment of others. He loved Clara deeply, yet every rumor made him question himself. He would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, whispering to himself, "Am I enough? Can I ever be enough?" Clara, though steadfast in her love, was not immune to doubt. Her parents' voices haunted her. At times she wondered if she had doomed herself to a life of struggle. She never said it aloud, but Daniel could feel the distance in her silence, the unspoken question lingering in her eyes. And Rafael watched it all unfold with the quiet fury of a man who had endured too much loss to watch another take root. His son was unraveling, his daughter-in-law was being torn apart, and the ghost of his late wife seemed to whisper in the stillness of the night, "Do not let him fall." The breaking point came on a storm-soaked evening. Rain lashed against the windows, thunder rolled across the skies, and within the house a storm of its own erupted. Clara returned late, her dress damp, her face pale. Daniel, who had been pacing the floor, demanded in a trembling voice, "Where were you?" She hesitated. "I went to see them." The words struck Daniel harder than any blade. "You what?" His voice rose, his anger spilling like wildfire. "After everything they've said, everything they've done, while you went to them?" Clara's voice cracked, but her words carried desperation. "Daniel, they are my parents, they gave me life. I cannot erase them as if they were nothing. You ask me to choose, but how can I choose between the man I love and the blood that made me?" Daniel's hands trembled. His heart screamed to hold her, to remind her that love was enough, but pride spoke louder. "And what did they tell you this time, Clara? That I am a failure? That you deserve more? Do you believe them?" Clara's tears fell freely. "I believe in you, Daniel, but I cannot live in this war. Every day I am pulled apart, torn between you and them. I am breaking." Silence followed. Heavy, suffocating silence. Daniel turned away, his chest heaving, his pride shattered. Clara sank to the floor, sobbing. It was then that Rafael entered, his presence commanding, his face carved in stone. He looked at his son, then at Clara, and finally at the storm outside. When he spoke, his voice was steady, but beneath it lay the weight of 1,000 unshed sorrows. "Daniel," Rafael said, "your battle is not only with Richard and Evelyn, your battle is with yourself. You have let their voices become chains around your neck. You doubt your worth because they mock it. But worth is not given by others. It is claimed." He turned to Clara, his eyes softening though his voice remained firm. "And you, Clara, love is not divided. Love is chosen. You cannot cling to two shores at once, for in doing so, you will drown between them. You must decide where your loyalty lies, not tomorrow, not in whispers, but here and now." Clara's sobs quieted. Her eyes, swollen with grief, searched the faces of the two men she loved most. Daniel, broken but proud, stood rigid, his heart bleeding but hidden. Rafael, stern but weary, bore the weight of wisdom bought through suffering. In that moment, Clara felt the truth settle in her chest like a stone. She could not mend the rift between husband and parents. She could not live as a bridge between two worlds determined to tear each other apart. "I choose you, Daniel," she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. "I choose my husband." The words struck Daniel like fire. He turned, eyes burning with both relief and shame, and pulled Clara into his arms. Yet even as they clung to one another, the storm outside raged, a reminder that peace was still far away. Rafael watched them, his chest tightening with pride and sorrow. He knew that Clara's choice was not the end of the war but the true beginning. Richard and Evelyn would not surrender. Pride such as theirs did not yield. It only struck harder when wounded. And now, with Clara's loyalty declared, they would see Daniel not just as an unworthy man, but as an enemy who had stolen their daughter as soul. That night, as lightning split the sky, Rafael stood by the window, his silhouette carved against the storm. He whispered to himself, to the memory of Sophia, to the silence that had been his companion for years. The turning point has come. The storm has chosen its path. And now we must be ready, for the battle that follows will decide everything. And with those words, the path of their lives shifted forever. Clara's choice should have been the beginning of healing, a declaration that love was stronger than blood, that the bond of marriage was unbreakable. Yet in truth, her words only drew the first blood in a greater war. When Richard and Evelyn learned of their daughter's decision, their pride, already wounded, twisted into fury. To them, Clara's loyalty was not an act of devotion but a betrayal, a daughter turning her back on the very hands that had raised her. Richard, a man who had built his life on authority, could not accept defiance. Evelyn, who thrived on control, could not accept disobedience. They swore that Daniel would pay, and so they struck not with fists, but with poison more deadly than any weapon: influence. Richard, with his vast circle of connections, began to weave a narrative against Daniel. At gatherings, in hushed conversations over wine, in business meetings where Daniel's name was mentioned, Richard's voice was always there, dripping venom. "Daniel is reckless, he is unstable, he cannot provide for my daughter. He is a man who clings to pride because he has nothing else." Evelyn moved with subtler precision, planting seeds of doubt wherever Clara's name was spoken. "Poor Clara," she sighed to family friends. "She hides her suffering well, but one cannot live on love alone, not when the world demands more. She was meant for a brighter life, but now she is trapped." The rumor spread like fire through dry fields. Soon, Daniel felt the walls closing in. Opportunities that once seemed within reach now slipped through his grasp. Invitations dwindled. Doors that were once open shut quietly in his face. His colleagues, who had once respected him, began to look with cautious eyes, repeating whispers they had heard but never questioned. Daniel's pride, already fragile, began to crack. Each rejection was a wound, each whisper a scar. At home he grew restless, pacing the floor like a caged beast. Clara tried to soothe him, her voice soft, her hands gentle, but the poison had taken root. Clara, he snapped one evening. Do you not see what they are doing? Do you not hear what they say? Your parents have destroyed my name. Clara's heart shattered at his words. They are wrong, Daniel. Their pride blinds them. You are worth more than they could ever see. But Daniel turned away, his voice bitter. Am I? Or do you begin to doubt too? Do you lie awake at night, wondering if they were right? The accusation pierced Clara like a blade. She wept, but Daniel did not reach for her. His pride held his arm stiff, his heart locked away behind anger. And in the silence of their home, love began to suffocate. Rafael watched powerless as his son and daughter-in-law drifted apart. He wanted to roar, to strike against Richard and Evelyn with the fury that burned in his veins. But he knew that the true battle was not with them. It was within Daniel himself. Pride, once noble, had turned into chains, and Clara, torn between loyalty and despair, was fading beneath the weight of it all. The breaking point came on a night colder than winter. Daniel returned home, his face pale, his eyes hollow. He had lost a promotion he had worked for years to earn, not because of his performance, but because of whispers. Whispers planted by Richard. Whispers that had poisoned the minds of his superiors. He entered the house in silence. Clara rose to greet him, but his eyes, once warm, now burned with rage. This is your parents' doing, he spat, his voice shaking. They have taken everything from me. My name, my career, my dignity, and you. You are their accomplice. Clara recoiled as though struck. Daniel, how can you say that? I stood by you. I chose you. I left everything behind for you. But Daniel's pain had blinded him. You are their daughter. Their blood runs in you. Perhaps you never truly left them. The words fell like stones, crushing Clara's spirit. She collapsed into tears, pleading with him to see her heart, but Daniel turned away, consumed by bitterness. Rafael, who had heard the argument from the next room, entered with fire in his eyes. His voice thundered, Enough! Daniel, do not destroy with your own hands what you swore to protect. You blame Clara for her parents' sins, but she has chosen you again and again. If you lose her, it will not be Richard or Evelyn who break you. It will be you. But Daniel, trembling with pride and sorrow, shouted back, You do not understand, Father. You have never understood. All my life I have lived in your shadow, in silence, in sacrifice. And now, when I fight for my name, for my worth, everything crumbles. Do you not see? I am a failure. The confession ripped through the air like thunder. Rafael froze, his heart aching. He saw in his son not just anger, but the ghost of a boy who had once clung to him in grief, the boy who had lost his mother, the boy who had buried his pain beneath layers of pride. Rafael's voice softened, breaking with emotion. Daniel, you are not a failure. You are my son. I buried your mother with these hands, and I swore I would raise you to be stronger than me, and you are. But strength is not pride. Strength is knowing when to bend, when to forgive, when to love, even in the face of hate. Do not let Richard's poison turn you into the very thing you despise. Daniel's chest heaved, his eyes filled with tears he refused to shed. Clara, broken but still clinging to hope, whispered through sobs, Daniel, please, come back to me. But Daniel could not answer. He stormed out into the night, leaving Clara trembling in Rafael's arms, leaving the house echoing with emptiness. And so the downfall had begun. Clara's heart, though loyal, began to fracture under the weight of Daniel's rage. Daniel, consumed by bitterness, drifted further into the shadows of his own pride, and Rafael, weary yet unyielding, knew that the family was racing toward a precipice, a place where one misstep could shatter everything beyond repair. The storm had grown, the battle lines were clear, and the true cost of love was about to be revealed. The night Daniel stormed out of his home was the beginning of an unraveling that could no longer be stopped. He wandered the rain-slicked streets like a man without anchor, his thoughts a storm louder than the thunder above. Rage burned in him, but beneath it, sorrow festered like a wound. He was not only fighting his in-laws, he was fighting himself, his pride, his failures, his fears. Meanwhile, Clara remained at home, her spirit shattered. She sat on the floor, clutching the wedding ring on her finger, whispering Daniel's name as though her voice could bring him back. Rafael stood by her side, silent yet steadfast, his eyes dark with the grief of a man watching history repeat itself, a family slipping through his hands. But fate would not allow silence for long. The next day, Clara's parents arrived unannounced once more. Richard and Evelyn swept into the house with cold arrogance, as though they were rescuers arriving at a battlefield to claim the wounded. Evelyn rushed to her daughter's side, her voice dripping false sweetness. "My poor Clara," she cooed, wrapping her in an embrace. "You see now, don't you? Daniel cannot give you peace. He cannot give you security. Come home with us, child. Leave this chaos behind." Richard, towering and stern, added, "This farce has gone on long enough. Clara, you belong with your family, not in this pit of shame. Pack your things. You will not waste another day here." Clara's tears fell freely, but she shook her head. Her voice trembled, but it carried resolve. "No, father. No, mother. I chose Daniel. He is my husband, and I will not abandon him." Evelyn's face hardened, her mask slipping. "You are blind, Clara. You let foolish love destroy you. That man is beneath you, and he always will be." Before Clara could answer, Rafael stepped forward. His presence filled the room like a storm, his voice deep and unyielding. "Enough. This is not your home. You have no right to command here. Clara has made her choice, and you will respect it." Richard turned on him with fury. "And who are you to speak of rights? You, a man who raised his son in silence and failure? You, who could not even protect your wife from the grave? You think yourself wise, Rafael, but you are nothing. Your son is nothing." The words struck deep, but Rafael did not flinch. His eyes, sharp as steel, bore into Richard's with the weight of years of buried pain. "I may have failed in many ways, Richard, but I did not fail in love. I raised a son who loves fiercely, who gives everything of himself, even when the world mocks him. That is worth more than all the gold you worship." Clara sobbed between them, begging them to stop, but Richard's fury only grew. "Your son is weak. He cannot protect her, cannot provide for her, cannot even stand against me without trembling. And you speak of love as though it fills stomachs or builds futures. Love is nothing without power." At that moment, the door burst open. Daniel stood there, rain dripping from his hair, his eyes wild with rage and sorrow. He had heard enough. "You speak of power, Richard," Daniel roared, his voice shaking the very walls. "But power without love is tyranny. You call me weak because I do not bow to you, because I do not worship wealth. But let me tell you, I would rather be poor with Clara in my arms than rich and alone in a palace of lies." Clara rushed to him, clinging to his chest, her tears soaking his shirt, but Richard stepped forward, his face twisted with hatred. "You dare stand before me with such arrogance? You are nothing, Daniel. I will see you crushed. I will see you destroyed." Daniel's fists clenched, his body trembling with the urge to strike. But before he could move, Rafael's hand gripped his shoulder. His father's voice, calm yet commanding, echoed through the storm of the moment. "No, Daniel. Do not fight him with fists. That is what he wants, to drag you into the mud of his pride. Show him that true strength is restraint. Show him that you are not his mirror." Daniel's chest heaved, his anger boiling, but slowly he released his fists. His eyes, still blazing, locked onto Richard's. "I will not fight you, because you are already defeated. You think you have power, Richard, but you cannot control your own daughter's heart. You cannot destroy the love between us. That is your failure." Richard's face flushed red, his pride shattering under the weight of truth. Evelyn gasped, clutching her husband's arm, but Richard shook her off, his rage consuming him. For a moment it seemed he might strike Daniel, but Clara stepped between them, her voice rising with a strength neither parent had ever heard from her. "Enough. I am not a child. I am not a pawn. I am a wife, a woman, and I have chosen my life. If you cannot accept that, then you will see me no more. Leave, father. "Leave, mother, or lose me forever." The words silenced the room. Evelyn's lips trembled, torn between pride and fear. Richard's jaw tightened, his fury battling with the realization that he had no control left. For the first time, the mighty Richard looked small, diminished. He turned away without a word, storming out into the rain. Evelyn followed, her face pale, her pride cracked but not broken. The door slammed behind them, leaving only silence. Daniel collapsed into Clara's arms, his body shaking with exhaustion and relief. Rafael stood over them, his chest rising and falling heavily, his eyes glistening with the rare sting of tears. For a moment, it seemed as though peace had been won, but Rafael knew better. He looked toward the door, toward the storm outside, and whispered to himself, unheard by the others, "This battle is over, but the war has only just begun." The storm had passed, but its echoes lingered within the walls of Daniel's home. The night after Richard and Evelyn's furious departure was eerily silent. No raised voices, no thunder outside, only the heavy breathing of three souls who had endured a war without swords. Clara sat at the table, her eyes swollen from tears, her hands trembling as they clutched Daniel's. She had spoken words she never imagined she could, words that cut her parents away from her life. For the first time, she was free, but freedom came with a cost. The weight of what she had lost pressed down on her chest like a stone. Daniel sat beside her, his head bowed, shame gnawing at him. He had fought for Clara, yes, but he had also wounded her with his anger and his doubts. He saw her fragility, her sacrifice, and for the first time he realized the depth of what love demanded. It was not pride, it was not dominance, it was sacrifice, the willingness to bleed so the other might heal. Rafael watched them both, his heart heavy. He had spoken fiercely that night, stood like a shield between his family and the storm, but inside, he felt the years pressing upon him. His silence, his discipline, his endurance, all of it had been for Daniel. And now, seeing his son broken yet still standing, Rafael understood that his role as father was nearing its final chapter. Days turned into weeks. Richard and Evelyn did not return. Whispers in the city grew quieter, though the shadow of scandal lingered. Daniel struggled at work, his reputation bruised, but Clara stood at his side through every setback. And slowly, their bond began to mend. Nights once filled with silence now carried conversations again. Tentative, fragile, but real. It was Rafael who bore the greatest change. He began to spend more hours in solitude, sitting beneath the tree where he often spoke to the memory of his late wife, Sophia. His body was weary, but his spirit was at peace. For years he had lived in silence, wondering if his sacrifices had been in vain. Now, watching Daniel and Clara rebuild their love, he knew the answer. One evening, as the sun sank into the horizon, Rafael called Daniel to his side. His voice was softer than Daniel had ever heard, yet it carried the weight of finality. "My son," Rafael said, "I have carried you through storms, but this storm you have carried yourself. You must remember, a man's worth is not in gold nor in the opinions of others, but in the love he protects. Guard Clara, guard your home. That is your true inheritance." Daniel's throat tightened. He wanted to protest, to beg his father not to speak as though his time was ending, but Rafael only placed a hand on his shoulder and smiled faintly. Sacrifice, Rafael knew, was not always death. Sometimes it was stepping back, allowing the next generation to stand without the shadow of the old. And so, in his quiet dignity, Rafael prepared to fade from the forefront, knowing his son's story was now his own to write. Seasons changed. The fire of conflict dimmed into embers, though its scars remained etched in the lives of all who endured it. Daniel and Clara walked through the ashes of their struggle, hand in hand, their love tested and tempered like steel in a furnace. What once was fragile now carried the strength of survival. Clara, though still haunted by memories of her parents' voices, no longer trembled beneath their shadow. Her choice had cost her family ties, yet it had given her something greater, the freedom to stand in her own truth. In Daniel's arms, she had found not luxury but a love unyielding, a love that endured storms and came out stronger. Daniel, too, was transformed. The man who once measured himself against the pride of others now understood that worth was not in reputation or wealth but in sacrifice. His failures no longer defined him. His love did. And though whispers still lingered in the city, he no longer bent beneath them. He had found his strength not in the eyes of others but in Clara's gaze, in Rafael's faith, and in the quiet dignity of perseverance. And then there was Rafael, the old warrior of silence, the father who had endured grief, raised his son in solitude, and stood as a shield in the face of storms. He had given all he could, and now he lived in peace, his days slower, his evenings spent beneath the tree where Sophia's memory lingered like a whisper in the wind. One golden evening, as the sun painted the sky in hues of fire and gold, the three of them sat together in the garden. Clara tended to the flowers she had planted when their marriage was new, flowers that had survived every storm just as they had. Daniel sat beside her, his hand wrapped around hers, his eyes soft, no longer burning with rage but with quiet contentment. Rafael, seated in his old chair, watched them with a faint smile. He spoke softly, his voice carrying the weight of final wisdom. "My children," he said, "life will always bring storms. Some will try to tear you apart, some will test your very soul. But remember this, storms do not destroy what is rooted deep. Love is not fragile if it is built on sacrifice, on patience, on truth. That is what survives." Clara's eyes filled with tears as she leaned against Daniel. Daniel, his voice hushed, replied, "Father, I see it now. Love is not something we demand. It is something we guard, something we give, even when it costs us." Rafael closed his eyes, letting the evening breeze wash over him. For the first time in many years, his heart was light. He had seen his son stumble, fall, rise again. He had seen a woman choose love over pride, courage over comfort, and in their struggle he had seen the legacy of his own sacrifices take root. As the last rays of sunlight faded, Rafael whispered, almost to himself, "Sophia, we did not fail him. He has become more than I ever dreamed." Silence followed, but it was no longer heavy. It was peace, the kind of silence that holds love, not loss. The story of Daniel, Clara, and Rafael did not end in riches or grandeur. It ended in something far greater: resilience. A reminder that love, though tested, though battered by storms, can survive if it is chosen every day. And so their tale stood not as a tragedy but as a testament that in a world of pride and power, the greatest strength lies in the quiet endurance of love.